The first time my son-in-law said, "You wouldn't understand, Mom, it's a tech thing," I smiled. But something inside me went very still. We were sitting at my daughter's dining table. The late afternoon sun was slipping through the beige curtains, catching the dust in the air. I could smell roasted garlic from the chicken she had made. The ceiling fan ticked in that uneven rhythm it always had, like it was thinking before it moved. Sullivan didn't look at me when he said it. He was staring at his phone, thumbs moving fast, confident, certain. My daughter Rosalie laughed softly beside him, not cruel, just automatic. The way you laugh when you trust the person next to you more than the person across from you. I folded my napkin on my lap. "You're probably right," I said gently. "I'm still learning." That was his first mistake. I have always believed that people underestimate quiet women. They see gray in your hair and assume your mind has dimmed with it. They see you ask a question and assume you don't know the answer. They mistake patience for ignorance. I am 62 years old. I taught accounting at the community college for 30 years. I balanced budgets before Sullivan learned to tie his shoes. I raised my daughter alone after her father passed, paying bills online when most of my friends still mailed checks. Technology doesn't frighten me. But I let him think it did. That dinner was just 3 weeks after Rosalie and Sullivan moved into their new townhouse. A neat place with white walls and smart lighting that responded to voice commands. Sullivan had installed cameras at the door, thermostats that adjusted themselves, and a refrigerator that could tell you when the milk was expiring. He loved explaining it all. "Well, it syncs with the cloud," he'd say, as if the word itself were magic. I would nod. "Clouds can be unpredictable," I'd reply softly. He never caught the humor in that. Rosalie was glowing in those days. Marriage had settled on her like warm sunlight. She was 34, finally steady after years of false starts with men who couldn't commit. Sullivan was ambitious, organized, charming in that polished way. He worked in digital asset management, which sounded impressive and vague at the same time. I wanted to like him. I tried to like him, but there was always something in the way he answered questions. A small tightening around his mouth, as if every conversation were a competition he intended to win. The first clue came quietly. It always does. Rosalie called me one Tuesday evening. Her voice was thin. "Mom, did you try to log into my bank account?" I was sitting at my kitchen table reading. The kettle had just clicked off. "No," I said carefully. "Why would I do that?" There was an alert. Someone attempted a password reset. It showed your IP address. My IP address, that made me pause. "I haven't touched your account, sweetheart." A silence stretched between us. I could hear Sullivan in the background, his voice low, directing. "Maybe you clicked something by accident, Mom," Rosalie said finally. "You know how those phishing emails look." I closed my book. "I didn't." Another silence. "It's probably nothing," she said quickly. "Sullivan fixed it." Of course he did. After we hung up, I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. Slow, calm, I checked my browser history, my email logs, my router activity, nothing unusual. Then I logged into my router settings. Something I doubted Sullivan imagined I knew how to do. There it was. A new device had connected to my network 2 days earlier, for exactly 12 minutes. A device I did not recognize. I stared at the MAC address, numbers and letters precise and unfeeling. Someone had sat outside my house or very close to it. I felt that stillness again, not panic, recognition. The next Sunday I invited them for lunch. I made pot roast. The kind that cooks low and slow until the carrots surrender and the meat falls apart under your fork. Sullivan complimented it with that careful smile of his. "You're amazing in the kitchen, Mom," he said. "I've had practice," I replied. While Rosalie helped me clear the dishes, Sullivan wandered into my study. I watched from the hallway. His movements were casual, curious. He noticed my desktop computer. "Oh," he said lightly when I entered. "You still use one of these?" "I prefer a larger screen," I answered. He leaned closer to it. "You should upgrade. Security risks on older systems can be problematic." There it was again, that tone, concern wrapped in superiority. "I manage," I said. He smiled too quickly. That evening after they left, I checked my router again, another unfamiliar device. This time connected for 8 minutes. I sat down slowly. Sullivan worked in digital asset management. He had access to financial systems. He knew Rosalie's passwords. He knew mine were similar. I had once foolishly mentioned that I reused variations to remember them easily. That was years ago, but some men store information the way squirrels store nuts. I leaned back in my chair. It wasn't about whether I understood technology. It was about whether he understood me, and he didn't. I did not sleep that night, not because I was afraid. Because I was thinking, there is a difference. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I had ever had with Sullivan, every small correction. Every gentle dismissal. You probably clicked something. It's complicated. You wouldn't really get how blockchain works. It wasn't what he said, it was how easily he said it, as if I were a child, as if I were manageable. By morning, my mind was clear. If someone had accessed my network from outside, it meant proximity. The signal range wasn't endless. It meant a car parked nearby, a neighbor, or someone visiting. Sullivan had been here Sunday, 2 days before the first login attempt on Rosalie's account. I made coffee, strong, no sugar. Then I did something very simple. I changed everything. Every password, every security question, two-factor authentication enabled on every account I owned. I separated devices, updated firmware, disabled remote administration. I even renamed my Wi-Fi network to something uninviting and dull. Accounting Archive 62, no one curious would bother with that. Then I waited, 3 days passed. On the 4th, Rosalie called again. Her voice sounded strained this time. Mom, Sullivan says there's been unusual activity on your retirement account. I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. What kind of activity? He said there was an inquiry. Like someone was trying to estimate liquidation penalties. Liquidation, that word does not float casually into a conversation. I didn't authorize anything, I said. I know, he just thought you should check. He's worried someone's targeting you. Of course he was worried. That's thoughtful of him, I replied evenly. After we hung up, I logged into my retirement account. No inquiries, no attempted withdrawals, no flags, nothing. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. He was testing, probing to see what I would say, whether I would panic. Whether I would ask him for help. That was his second mistake. The following weekend, I invited Rosalie alone. Just a girls' afternoon, I told her. I miss you. She came in jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her hair pulled back the way she used to wear it in college. For a moment, she was just my daughter again, not someone's wife. We sat at the kitchen table with tea. She seemed tired. Are you sleeping? I asked gently. She hesitated. Not great. Marriage adjustment. She gave a small smile. Sullivan's just very driven. He's always thinking about money, investments, opportunities. Opportunities can be dangerous if they move too fast, I said. She looked at me, something flickering behind her eyes. He's been talking about consolidating assets, she admitted quietly. Says it's smarter to manage everything together, retirement accounts, savings, even yours eventually. Mine, he thinks it would be easier if he helped oversee it for tax efficiency. There it was, out in the open now. And what do you think? I asked. She stared at her teacup. I don't know, he makes it sound logical. Does it feel logical? That question lingered. She didn't answer right away. I just don't want to make mistakes, she whispered. Oh, Rosalie, you already feel something is wrong. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You don't have to let anyone manage what you worked for, I said softly, even if they use impressive words. She nodded, but her eyes were uncertain, and uncertainty is fertile ground for manipulation. That evening I drove past their townhouse. I did not plan to, but I found myself on that street. Their curtains were open. Sullivan sat at the dining table with his laptop, multiple screens glowing in the dim room. His posture leaned forward, focused, intent. I watched from my car. Then I saw it, on the corner of the table, papers, printed documents. One of them looked familiar. I have spent decades reviewing financial statements. Your eyes recognize formatting before your brain does. It looked like a retirement account summary. My retirement account summary. My heart did not race, it settled. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place. 2 days later, I received an email. It appeared to come from my brokerage firm. Subject line, urgent verification required. The logo looked correct. The formatting almost perfect. Almost. The greeting read, Dear Client, not Dear Margaret, not even my full name. I hovered over the sender address. Close, but not exact. Sullivan had once told me that the difference between a successful phishing email and a failed one is a single character. He had smiled when he said it. I did not click the link. Instead, I forwarded it directly to my broker. Then I picked up the phone. Daniel, I said when he answered, I believe someone is attempting to impersonate your firm. He was silent for a beat. That's not the first call we've had this week, he admitted. We're investigating. This week, not months ago, not random, recent, targeted. I thanked him and hung up. Then I did something Sullivan would not expect. I hired a cybersecurity consultant, not a flashy one. A quiet, meticulous woman named Laura Chen who specialized in digital forensics for financial disputes. When she arrived at my house, she wore no-nonsense glasses and carried a small black case. "I don't need you to prove anything yet," I told her. "I need you to observe." She examined my router logs, my devices, my email headers. Within an hour, she looked up at me. "Someone physically close to this house has attempted packet sniffing," she said calmly. "Twice." I nodded. "And the phishing email?" I asked. "Highly customized," she replied. "Whoever created it knew which brokerage you use. That information was not public." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, not fear, grief, because this was not a stranger, it was family. A week later, Rosalie called again. Her voice broke before she even finished the first sentence. "Mom, Sullivan says my credit card flagged a transfer I didn't authorize." "How much?" I asked quietly. "5,000. Was it completed?" "No, it froze." "Did he handle it?" "Yes, he said he called the bank." "Did you?" Silence. "No, call them now," I said gently on speaker. I waited while she dialed. The bank representative confirmed something simple. No transfer had been initiated, no freeze had occurred, there had been no alert. Rosalie's breathing changed. Slow, shallow. "He told me there was," she whispered after she hung up. I closed my eyes, the mask was cracking. "He said someone must be testing our accounts," she continued, voice trembling. "He said maybe you were targeted first and now it's spreading." Spreading, he was building a narrative, a story where he was the protector, and I was the vulnerable starting point. That was his third mistake. Because he forgot something fundamental, I raised Rosalie. I know the sound of confusion in her voice. I know when doubt has taken root, and once doubt begins, truth does not have to shout, it only has to wait. I stood by my window that evening, watching the sky darken over my small backyard. The air smelled like rain. Sullivan believed he was the most technologically sophisticated person in the room, but technology leaves footprints, and pride leaves even deeper ones. There is a moment when suspicion turns into certainty. It does not arrive loudly, it settles, like dust on a shelf you suddenly notice has not been wiped in years. For me, that moment came on a Thursday afternoon when Laura called. "I found something," she said. Her voice was calm, professional, but underneath it there was that quiet edge people get when the pieces align too neatly. "I traced the phishing domain," she continued. "It was registered through a privacy service, but the payment method used to purchase it was not anonymous." I waited. "It was linked to a digital wallet. The same wallet has interacted with a small tech consulting LLC registered under your son-in-law's name." I closed my eyes. "Are you certain?" "As certain as documentation allows," she replied. "I've archived everything." There it was, not a theory. Not a guess, documentation. I thanked her and sat very still after we hung up. The clock above my kitchen doorway ticked with exaggerated patience. Outside, a lawn mower droned somewhere down the block. Life going on unaware. I had proof, but proof is a delicate thing inside a family. It can shatter more than lies ever do. I did not confront Sullivan immediately. That would have been easy. Instead, I watched. Over the next 2 weeks, small things shifted. Rosalie stopped mentioning asset consolidation. Sullivan stopped bringing up my retirement account, but he grew attentive, too attentive. He began sending me articles about online scams, text messages late at night. "Just making sure you're careful, Mom. Seniors are heavily targeted." Seniors, I let that word sit. Once he even offered to audit my online security. "It's what I do," he said casually over dinner. "I can run some diagnostics free of charge." "I've already had someone look at it," I replied. His fork paused midair. "Oh yes, a consultant." The smallest flicker crossed his face, not fear, calculation, and he asked. She said everything seems secure. I held his gaze, he smiled. "That's good." But his jaw had tightened. A few days later, Rosalie came by unexpectedly. She didn't call first, she just knocked. When I opened the door, her eyes were red. I stepped aside without asking questions. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I had not yet filled. "He's been weird," she whispered. "In what way?" "He's secretive, keeps closing his laptop when I walk in, says he's working on a big opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "He won't say." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something stronger than confusion. I saw fear. "Mom, what if he's in trouble financially?" I did not answer immediately because the truth was more complicated. He might be trying to create money, I said carefully. The wrong way. She swallowed. I checked our joint savings yesterday, she admitted. 10,000 is gone. Gone, he said. He invested it. Did you agree to that? No, the word hung between us. No, that is where betrayal begins, not with shouting, with one small, unauthorized decision. I reached across the table again, just like before. Rosalie, I said softly, do you trust him? Her eyes filled. I thought I did. That night I opened the file Laura had sent me, screenshots, domain registrations, wallet transactions, and then something else. A pattern. Sullivan had registered 3 similar domains in the last 6 months, variations of financial institutions, each active for only a short period, each tied to small digital transfers. Small enough to avoid major scrutiny, but consistent. This was not panic behavior, it was systematic. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the domains had been accessed repeatedly from their home IP address, not just his, theirs. If this surfaced publicly, Rosalie's name could be pulled into it, not because she did anything wrong, but because marriage intertwines more than hearts. It intertwines liability. That was when I understood the scale. This was no longer about me. It was about protecting my daughter. I asked Laura one final question the next morning. If this were reported, I said, what would happen? It depends, she replied. If victims come forward, law enforcement could investigate. Financial fraud across state lines is serious. And if no one reports it, it may continue. Continue? I thought of the elderly clients I used to teach at the college. Widows, retirees, people who trusted official-looking emails. Sullivan wasn't just probing my accounts. He was practicing, testing his scripts on someone he assumed wouldn't notice. Me, that was his 4th mistake. Because he confused kindness with weakness. The confrontation did not happen the way I imagined. It happened because Sullivan grew impatient. One Sunday afternoon, he called me directly. Mom, can we talk? His voice was unusually formal. Of course, I've been thinking. It might be best if we streamline family finances. Rosalie gets overwhelmed and I don't want you stressed either. I'm not stressed, I replied. I know, but still. If you granted me limited access to review your accounts, I could ensure everything's optimized. There it was, out loud. No, I said calmly, a pause. Why not? Because I manage my finances just fine. His tone shifted. It's not about that, it's about efficiency. Efficiency for whom? Silence, then sharper. You don't trust me. Trust, a word people use when they want access. I trust my own judgment, I said evenly. He exhaled through his nose. You think I'm trying to take something from you? I think, I said quietly, that transparency shouldn't require persuasion. Another long pause. When he spoke again, the charm was thinner. Rosalie worries about you. Does she? Yes, she thinks you're vulnerable. I almost smiled. That's interesting, I replied, because she came to me worried about you. The silence that followed was heavy, cold. I don't appreciate that, he said finally. Neither do I answered, and then I ended the call. That evening, Rosalie called in tears. He's angry, she said. He says you're turning me against him. I haven't turned you anywhere, I replied gently. I've only answered questions. He says you're paranoid, that you hired someone to spy on him. I hired someone to secure my own network. Why? Because your husband tried to breach it, but I did not say that yet. Because I value caution, I said instead. She was quiet. Then, in a small voice, if there's something I need to know, please tell me. There it was, the invitation, the doorway. I looked at the folder on my desk. Proof, documentation, evidence that could fracture her marriage in a single evening. My heart ached, not for Sullivan, for Rosalie, for the version of love she believed she had. Come over tomorrow, I said softly. We'll talk. When I hung up, I stood in my study and let the weight of it settle. Tomorrow would change everything, not because I wanted revenge, but because truth, once uncovered, does not stay buried out of politeness. It rises. And when it rises, it demands light. The morning Rosalie came over, the sky was the color of wet cement, gray, heavy, waiting. I had already made coffee, not because I thought she would drink it, but because routine steadies me. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and familiar. The kind of scent that has held our conversations for decades, heartbreaks, job offers, college applications, grief. I laid the folder on the table, closed. I did not open it yet. When she knocked, I felt it in my chest, not fear, grief. I opened the door and she stepped inside without speaking. Her eyes were swollen. She had not slept. Did you two argue? I asked gently. She nodded. He said you're trying to control me, that you never liked him. I took her coat and hung it carefully, buying myself a few seconds. This isn't about liking him, I said. We sat at the table. The folder between us felt like a third presence. She looked at it. What is that? Documentation. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached toward it. Of what? Of something Sullivan hoped I wouldn't understand. The room was very quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. I opened the folder slowly. No drama, no sudden movements, just paper sliding against paper. I showed her the domain registrations first, then the digital wallet connection, then the screenshots of access logs tied to their home IP address. She stared. At first she did not react. Her eyes moved across the pages carefully, methodically. She has always read like that, thorough, precise. Then she shook her head. No, I hired an independent consultant, I said softly. This didn't come from me guessing. She swallowed. There has to be an explanation. Yes, I said gently, there does. Tears began forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. He said someone was targeting us. I nodded. He was right. Her breath hitched. I'm saying he registered fraudulent domains designed to look like financial institutions. Her hands moved to her mouth. Mom, I did not reach for her this time. She needed space to let reality settle. Has anyone lost money? She whispered. I don't know. That was the honest answer. She closed her eyes. I gave him access to my savings because I trusted him, she said. He said he could grow it faster. How much? 30,000. The number landed hard. And the 10,000 missing from your joint account? He said it was an investment opportunity. Did you see documentation? No, her voice was small now, like when she was a child admitting she broke something fragile. I slid one more page toward her. A transaction record showing funds transferred from a shared account into the digital wallet tied to Sullivan's LLC. Her eyes widened. That's our account number. Yes. She stared at the page for a long time. Then she whispered, why would he do this? That question always comes. Not how, not what. Why? Because we want motive to soften betrayal. Sometimes, I said carefully, people convince themselves they're smarter than the system, that they'll win before anyone notices. And if they do, they assume they can fix it before it collapses. She leaned back in her chair as if something inside her had given way. I married him, she said faintly. Yes. What does this mean? That depends on what you decide. She looked at me then. Not as a mother, as a woman asking another woman what survival looks like. We did not confront Sullivan immediately. Rosalie asked for time. Let me talk to him first, she said. I agreed, but I also gave her one piece of advice. Do not tell him what you know yet, I said. Ask questions. Listen. She nodded. When she left, the house felt different, not quieter, heavier. I knew what was coming. Men like Sullivan do not crumble easily. They justify, they deflect, they attack. That evening, Rosalie called. Her voice was steady in a way that worried me. I asked him about the missing money, she said, and he said it's tied up in short-term crypto trades. Did he show you proof? He opened his laptop. My stomach tightened and the numbers were there, charts, transactions. I closed my eyes briefly. He would be prepared. What did you ask next? I asked why he registered domains that look like banks. Silence, then she exhaled slowly. He denied it. Of course he did. He said anyone can fake documents. I almost smiled, predictable, and when I mentioned the digital wallet tied to his LLC, her voice cracked. He said you fabricated everything. There it was, the pivot, attack the source. Did he get angry? I asked. Yes. Did he threaten you? No, but he said if I believed you over him, our marriage was already broken. That is how manipulation sounds, not shouting, ultimatums dressed as wounded pride. I told him I needed space, she continued. And what did he say? He said if I walked out, I shouldn't come back. The audacity. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. Where are you? I'm in my car. Come home. She did not hesitate. When she arrived, she did not cry. She walked in, set her purse down, and sat at the kitchen table like someone who had just signed a contract she didn't want to read. I asked him one more question, she said quietly. What? I asked if he ever tried to access your accounts. And he didn't answer. Silence can be louder than confession. I watched his face, she continued. He didn't look shocked, he looked irritated. Because he had been discovered, not because he felt remorse. That was his fifth mistake, underestimating how closely a wife watches her husband's face. The next morning, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my brokerage firm. "Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel said, voice tight, "we've identified multiple attempted phishing victims connected to the domain you reported. 2 elderly clients transferred funds." My throat tightened. "How much?" "48,000 combined." I closed my eyes. Real people, real savings, not hypothetical anymore. "Are you reporting it?" I asked. "Yes, it's escalated to federal authorities." The room felt suddenly colder. There would be an investigation, and digital trails do not vanish because someone hopes they will. I hung up and looked at Rosalie. She had heard enough from my side of the conversation to understand. "Mom," she whispered. "It's not small," I said, her face drained of color. "Will they trace it?" "Yes. And when they do," she didn't finish. She didn't need to. That afternoon, Sullivan showed up at my door, unannounced. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp. "I need to speak to you," he said. Rosalie stood behind me in the hallway. "You can speak here," I replied calmly. He glanced at her. "Alone?" "No," she said quietly. He looked between us, then he stepped inside. The air shifted, tight, charged. "You hired someone to investigate me," he said. "I hired someone to protect myself. You're destroying my marriage. I didn't register fraudulent domains." His eyes flashed. "You don't understand how this works." There it was again, that phrase. "I understand enough," I said softly. "You think I'm some criminal? I think people who manipulate financial systems rarely call themselves criminals." His breathing grew heavier. "You have no proof." I looked at him carefully. "Are you certain?" For the first time I saw it, not arrogance, not calculation, fear, small but there. And in that moment I knew something had shifted permanently. Because Sullivan had finally realized something he never considered before. I did understand technology, and I understood him. Sullivan stood in my living room like a man who had walked into the wrong house. Not because he didn't know the address, because the ground beneath him was no longer steady. Rosalie remained behind me, not hiding, just present. That alone unsettled him. He was used to speaking for her, framing conversations, redirecting. Now she was silent, watching. "You're overreacting," he said finally, running a hand through his hair. "Registering domains isn't illegal, it's market research." "Market research for what?" I asked calmly. "For identifying weaknesses in financial institutions' online security." I tilted my head slightly. "And you needed to impersonate them to do that? It's called penetration testing." "Who hired you?" Silence. "You can't just accuse someone of fraud because you don't like them," he snapped. "This isn't about liking you," I said evenly. "It's about digital wallet transactions tied to missing funds." Rosalie inhaled sharply beside me. Sullivan turned to her. "Are you really believing this?" "I asked you a question last night," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "Did you ever try to access my mother's accounts?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me again. "You're twisting this." I reached for the folder on the side table and handed him a copy of the documentation, not the original, just enough. He flipped through it quickly, too quickly. Then he laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You think this proves something? Anyone can fabricate logs." "That's true," I agreed. "Which is why the brokerage firm is conducting its own investigation." That caught him. His eyes flickered. "What investigation?" "They've reported phishing activity linked to those domains. Authorities are reviewing transaction trails." The room went quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the heating system turning on. Sullivan's posture changed, slightly, subtly, not the confident son-in-law anymore, a man calculating risk. "You reported me?" he asked. "I reported suspicious activity. I didn't mention your name. Yet." Rosalie stepped forward then. "Sullivan, did you take the 10,000 from our savings and move it into that wallet?" His mouth opened, closed. "It was temporary," he said finally. "Temporary." "That's not what I asked," she replied. "It was an investment vehicle. I was going to return it with profit." "You didn't tell me. You wouldn't have understood." The words landed heavy. He seemed to realize too late what he had just repeated. Rosalie's face shifted. Not anger, recognition. "That's what you always say," she whispered. He ran a hand over his face. "I did this for us." "For us?" she asked. "Yes, so we wouldn't have to worry about money." "You created the worry," she said softly. He looked at me again. "This is what you wanted," he accused. "To turn her against me?" I felt something settle inside my chest. "No," I said quietly. "I wanted you to underestimate me." He stared at me, and for the first time since I had known him, he had no quick response. He left without slamming the door. That was almost more unsettling. He simply walked out, shoulders tight. Rosalie sat down heavily on the couch. He admitted it, she murmured. Yes, but he still thinks he's right. That's the dangerous part, I said gently, when someone believes the harm they cause is justified. She stared at the carpet. What if he fixes it? She asked. That depends, I said carefully, on whether fixing it means returning money or changing behavior. She didn't answer because she knew the difference. 2 days later, federal investigators contacted me. The call was formal, measured. They asked how I became aware of the suspicious domain. I explained, calmly, factually. They did not accuse Sullivan by name, but they asked if anyone in my immediate circle had knowledge of my brokerage details. Yes, I said. My son-in-law works in digital asset management. There was a pause. We may need to speak with him, the investigator said. I assumed you might. After the call, I sat at my desk for a long time. This was no longer family tension. It was legal territory, and that line once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Rosalie moved back home that week. Not permanently, she said, just until I think. She brought 2 suitcases and her laptop. The townhouse remained technically hers too, but Sullivan did not call, not once. That silence told me more than any argument could. Men who feel wronged reach out. Men who feel exposed retreat. One evening, Rosalie sat at the kitchen table scrolling through their joint accounts. Her face was pale. There's more, she said. How much? Another 12,000 moved over the past 3 months. Without telling you, yes, to the same wallet. She nodded. I watched her carefully, not to see if she would break, but to see if she would stand. What do you want to do? I asked. She closed her laptop slowly. I want the truth in front of everyone, she said. There it was, the shift. Not revenge, not drama, clarity. The investigators moved faster than I expected. Sullivan was contacted for questioning the following week. He called Rosalie after that, not to apologize, to warn her. They're twisting this, he said, according to her. Your mom made it look worse than it is. What did you tell them? She asked him. That I conduct independent security research. And the money, it was a temporary allocation. She looked at him through the phone even if he couldn't see her. Did you ever intend to return it? A long silence. That's not the point. It was exactly the point. The public consequence did not explode overnight. It unfolded, quietly, methodically. The brokerage firm sent formal notices to affected clients. Internal audits flagged the domain network. Financial regulators began reviewing digital transactions tied to Sullivan's LLC. His employer suspended him pending review. Rosalie heard it from a colleague, not from him. He said he was taking leave, she told me. Truth bends easily in private, it straightens in public. The day investigators arrived at the townhouse, neighbors watched, not dramatically, just curious glances through blinds. 2 unmarked cars, 2 suited officials. Sullivan opened the door. I was not there, but Rosalie's friend across the street called her. It doesn't look good, she whispered. Rosalie did not cry. She sat at my kitchen table, hands folded, breathing evenly. This is real, she said. Yes. I loved him, I know, and he still chose this. Yes, that is the hardest truth, not that someone commits a wrong, but that they choose it repeatedly. A week later, Sullivan requested a meeting, all 3 of us, in a public place. A small cafe downtown, neutral ground. When we arrived, he looked thinner, less polished. There were dark circles under his eyes. He did not smile. They're building a case, he said without greeting. I assumed they would, I replied. He looked at Rosalie. I can fix this. If you stand by me, she didn't flinch. Fix it how? I'll repay everything. With what? She asked. I'll find a way. That's what you said before, she answered. His eyes hardened. You think she's protecting you? He said to her, nodding at me. She's protecting herself? Rosalie shook her head slowly. No, she protected herself. I chose not to. Silence stretched across the small cafe table. People around us sipped coffee, unaware that a marriage was quietly ending 3 feet away. Sullivan looked at me one last time. You enjoyed this, he said bitterly. I met his gaze. No, I said softly. I endured it. And that was the difference. After that meeting in the cafe, something inside me grew very quiet, not victorious, not relieved, just quiet. Because once the truth is spoken out loud in public, there is no more pretending, no more misunderstandings, no more explanations wrapped in impressive language. There is only consequence. Sullivan was formally charged 3 weeks later. Wire fraud, identity-related offenses, financial misrepresentation tied to his LLC. The language in the documents was clinical, clean, detached. Nothing about it reflected the dinners at my table. The holidays, the way he once brought Rosalie flowers on a random Tuesday just because he felt like it. Paper does not care about sentiment. Rosalie sat beside me when we read the notice. Her hand rested on her knee, fingers slightly curled inward like she was holding something invisible. "They're saying there are 6 confirmed victims," she murmured. "Yes, and possibly more." "Yes," her voice was steady, too steady. I keep replaying every time he told me he was protecting us. I didn't rush to answer because grief needs air. "It's hard to accept that someone can love you," she continued quietly, "and still justify hurting others." "Yes," I said, "it is." She leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Did he ever believe he was wrong? That depends on whether he measures wrong by law or by conscience. She nodded slowly. The news spread through our extended family within days, not dramatically. Just a series of uncomfortable phone calls. My sister called first. "Is it true?" she asked gently. "Yes." A pause. "I always thought he seemed polished." "Polish hides scratches," I said. Rosalie's cousins texted her, some with sympathy, some with subtle judgment disguised as concern. "How did you not see it?" That question always arrives, as if betrayal comes with warning labels, as if love should have built-in alarm systems. It does. Love assumes safety until proven otherwise. Sullivan's employer terminated him publicly. An internal memo circulated, the community whispered. At church, a few women looked at Rosalie with that particular expression people wear when they want to ask but don't dare. She held her head high. That's when I knew she was going to survive this, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she refused to shrink. The investigators requested one more meeting with me, this time in person. A modest federal building downtown, fluorescent lights, neutral walls. I answered their questions calmly. Yes, he had access to family financial details. Yes, he had offered to optimize accounts. Yes, I had documentation before they contacted me. One of the agents looked at me carefully. "Why didn't you confront him immediately?" he asked. "Because confrontation without evidence is just noise," I replied. He nodded. "You understood the technical aspects?" "I taught accounting for 30 years, I said. "Technology changes, human behavior does." That seemed to satisfy him. Rosalie filed for separation shortly after. She did it quietly, no dramatic announcement, just paperwork submitted with trembling hands. The night she signed, we sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where I had once shown her the folder. She stared at the final page. "This isn't how I imagined my marriage ending," she said. "No one imagines this version," I replied. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "He always said I didn't understand risk, that I was too cautious. And now I realize caution would have saved me." I reached across the table. "You were not foolish, you were trusting." She nodded, tears finally spilling over. "And you?" she asked softly. "Do you regret reporting it?" I thought carefully before answering. "I regret that it was necessary," I said, "but not that it was done, because silence would have made me complicit, and I have lived too long to carry someone else's guilt." The public consequence intensified when local news picked up the story, nothing sensational. Just a short article about a digital fraud investigation involving a regional tech consultant. Sullivan's name appeared in print, black letters, permanent. Rosalie saw it online first. She closed her laptop gently and walked outside. I followed her into the backyard. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. A neighbor's sprinkler ticked rhythmically. "I feel exposed," she admitted. "You didn't commit the crime." "I still married him." I stood beside her, not touching. "Marriage is not endorsement," I said quietly. "It's trust, and trust can be misplaced without being stupid." She exhaled slowly. "I don't want to be defined by this." "You won't be," I replied, "because scandals fade. Character doesn't." Sullivan attempted one last conversation. He came to the house late one evening, not to argue this time, to negotiate. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped. "I can make restitution," he said when I opened the door. "If Rosalie supports me, it looks better in court." Rosalie stepped forward before I could speak. "Support you how?" she asked. "By testifying that you were aware of my business research." Her face went still. "You want me to lie?" "It's not lying, it's reframing." She shook her head slowly. "That's what you always did." His jaw tightened. "You think this is black and white?" "It became that when you took money that wasn't yours," she replied. He looked at me then. "This is your victory." I met his gaze calmly. "No," I said, "this is your choice." He stood there a moment longer, then he left, And this time I felt something shift, not anger, not sadness, closure beginning its quiet work. Weeks passed, court dates were scheduled. Restitution discussions began. Sullivan eventually agreed to a plea deal, reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation and repayment plans. The details were technical, legal, structured. But behind them were 6 elderly victims who would recover their money. That mattered. Rosalie attended one hearing. Not for him, for herself. She wanted to see the process. When she returned home that evening, she sat down across from me. "He didn't look like the man I married," she said softly. "People under pressure reveal different layers," I replied. "He looked smaller," I nodded. Pride makes people look bigger than they are. Consequence restores proportion. She considered that. "I don't hate him," she admitted. "That's good. But I don't trust him either. That's wisdom." She gave me a small, tired smile. "You really did understand technology, didn't you?" I almost laughed. "I understood patterns," I said. "Technology just leaves better records." As the months passed, life began knitting itself back together. Rosalie found a new apartment across town, not large, not flashy, but hers. She transferred her accounts solely into her name. Met with a financial advisor, asked questions, took notes. Caution had replaced assumption, and it suited her. One evening, as we unpacked boxes in her new place, she paused. "Mom," she said quietly, "what if you hadn't noticed? I thought about that, the phishing email, the router logs." The small dismissive phrases, "I would have eventually," I replied. "How? Because arrogance always leaves fingerprints." She smiled softly. "And you always look." "Yes, I do." The day the court finalized Sullivan's sentencing, it rained, not dramatically. Just a steady, patient rain that blurred the edges of everything outside the courthouse windows. Rosalie chose not to attend this time. "I've heard enough," she said quietly that morning, standing in my kitchen with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. So I went alone, not out of obligation. Not out of anger, but because I wanted to witness the end of something I had unintentionally begun. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Neutral walls, wooden benches polished by years of restless hands, a quiet hum of whispered conversations before proceedings began. Sullivan sat at the defense table. He looked different, less sharp, less certain. The confidence that once filled rooms had thinned into something more fragile. He wasn't broken, just reduced. When the judge read the summary of the charges, wire fraud, fraudulent domain impersonation, unlawful financial transfers, the language was clinical. But the impact was not. Restitution ordered, probation with monitored restrictions, professional licensing revoked, mandatory financial ethics counseling. It wasn't a dramatic prison sentence. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was accountability, structured, permanent. Sullivan did not look at me until the very end. When he did, there was no accusation in his eyes anymore, just something quieter, regret perhaps, or the realization that intelligence without integrity collapses under its own weight. I did not nod. I did not smile. I simply held his gaze for a moment, then I left. When I returned home, Rosalie was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked up as I entered. "It's done," I said softly. She exhaled, not relief, release. "Was he okay?" she asked after a moment. "Yes," I answered honestly. He looked human. She nodded slowly. "I don't want him destroyed," she admitted. "He isn't," I said. "He's accountable. There's a difference." She closed her laptop. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about how easily he dismissed you." I smiled faintly. That wasn't personal. It felt personal. "It was strategic," I corrected gently. "Underestimate the quiet person in the room. It makes manipulation easier." She studied me. "And you let him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because pride is loud, and loud people rarely notice quiet preparation." "Because sometimes," I said softly, "the best way to protect yourself is to let someone believe you can't." She shook her head slightly, almost in disbelief. "I don't think I ever saw you that way." "That's good," I replied. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Rosalie began to talk, not about Sullivan, about herself, about the moments she ignored her instincts. "The first time he moved money without asking, I told myself it was efficient," she said one evening as we folded laundry. "The second time, I told myself I didn't want to seem controlling. And the third," she paused, "I stopped asking. There it was, not stupidity, not blindness, just the slow erosion of voice." "That's how it happens," I said gently, "not in one dramatic betrayal, in small permissions." She nodded. "I won't do that again." And I believed her. My relationship with technology changed too, not because I feared it, but because I respected it differently. I began teaching a small free class at the community center, nothing formal, just an hour every Thursday afternoon. Seniors and online safety. The first day, 6 people showed up, 3 widows, 1 retired mechanic, 2 couples who still wrote passwords on paper tucked into drawers. I didn't scare them. I didn't lecture. I told them a story. About a phishing email that almost fooled someone who was paying attention, about router logs and 2-factor authentication, about pride, about not assuming you're too old to learn. One woman raised her hand at the end. "Did you report him?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Was that hard?" "Yes." "Would you do it again?" Without hesitation, I answered. "Yes, because protecting yourself is not betrayal, it's responsibility." Rosalie's divorce finalized 6 months after the sentencing. No dramatic courtroom scene, just signatures, division of remaining assets. Restitution structured so that her personal funds were legally separated from his obligations. When she came home with the paperwork, she placed it on the kitchen table. "It feels official," she said. "It is." She sat down slowly. "I don't feel angry anymore. What do you feel?" She thought for a long moment. "Clear." That word settled warmly in my chest. Clear is better than angry. Clear means you see. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun lower itself behind the trees, Rosalie asked something I hadn't expected. "Mom, when he first said you wouldn't understand technology, what did you feel?" I smiled softly. Still, yes, because dismissal tells you more about someone than praise ever could." She leaned back in her chair. "I wish I had seen it sooner." "You saw it when you were ready." She looked at me carefully. "Were you ever afraid of him?" "Yes." I considered that honestly. "No," I said, "I was afraid for you." Her eyes softened. "And now I trust you." That seemed to mean something to her. Months later, I received a letter, handwritten, from Sullivan. I opened it at my desk. He did not apologize dramatically. He did not justify. He wrote simply that he had convinced himself he was smarter than the system. That he would win before anyone noticed. That when I didn't fall for it, he felt challenged instead of ashamed. He admitted he underestimated me. He admitted that arrogance had always been his weakness. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not as a trophy, not as closure, just as a reminder. Even intelligent men can mistake wisdom for ignorance. And sometimes it costs them everything. Rosalie eventually moved into a brighter apartment. More windows, more plants. She laughed more easily again, not the same as before, stronger. One afternoon, as we arranged books on her new shelf, she held up a small framed photo from her wedding day. She looked at it quietly. "Do you want to keep it?" I asked. She studied the image, the white dress, the confident groom, the hopeful bride. "Yes," she said finally, "but not for the reasons I thought." "Why then?" "To remember that I survived my own misjudgment." I nodded. "That is growth, not pretending it didn't happen, but refusing to let it define you." Looking back, the technology was never the real story. It was ego, control, assumption. Sullivan believed intelligence meant superiority. He believed complexity created advantage. He believed I wouldn't look closely. That was his first mistake, but it wasn't his worst. His worst mistake was believing that trust could be bent without breaking. The day the court finalized Sullivan's sentencing, it rained. Not dramatically, just a steady, patient rain that blurred the edges of everything outside the courthouse windows. Rosalie chose not to attend this time. "I've heard enough," she said quietly that morning, standing in my kitchen with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. So I went alone, not out of obligation, not out of anger, but because I wanted to witness the end of something I had unintentionally begun. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Neutral walls, wooden benches polished by years of restless hands, a quiet hum of whispered conversations before proceedings began. Sullivan sat at the defense table. He looked different, less sharp, less certain. The confidence that once filled rooms had thinned into something more fragile. He wasn't broken, just reduced. When the judge read the summary of the charges, wire fraud, fraudulent domain impersonation, unlawful financial transfers, the language was clinical. But the impact was not. Restitution ordered. Probation with monitored restrictions. Professional licensing revoked. Mandatory financial ethics counseling. It wasn't a dramatic prison sentence. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was accountability, structured, permanent. Sullivan did not look at me until the very end. When he did, there was no accusation in his eyes anymore. Just something quieter, regret perhaps, or the realization that intelligence without integrity collapses under its own weight. I did not nod, I did not smile. I simply held his gaze for a moment, then I left. When I returned home, Rosalie was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked up as I entered. "It's done," I said softly. She exhaled, not relief, release. "Was he okay?" she asked after a moment. "Yes," I answered honestly. He looked human. She nodded slowly. "I don't want him destroyed," she admitted. "He isn't," I said. "He's accountable. There's a difference." She closed her laptop. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about how easily he dismissed you." I smiled faintly. That wasn't personal. It felt personal. "It was strategic," I corrected gently. "Underestimate the quiet person in the room. It makes manipulation easier." She studied me. "And you let him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because pride is loud, and loud people rarely notice quiet preparation." "Because sometimes," I said softly, "the best way to protect yourself is to let someone believe you can't." She shook her head slightly, almost in disbelief. "I don't think I ever saw you that way." "That's good," I replied. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Rosalie began to talk, not about Sullivan, about herself, about the moments she ignored her instincts. "The first time he moved money without asking, I told myself it was efficient," she said one evening as we folded laundry. "The second time, I told myself I didn't want to seem controlling. And the third," she paused, "I stopped asking. There it was, not stupidity, not blindness, just the slow erosion of voice." "That's how it happens," I said gently, "not in one dramatic betrayal, in small permissions." She nodded. "I won't do that again." And I believed her. My relationship with technology changed too, not because I feared it, but because I respected it differently. I began teaching a small free class at the community center, nothing formal, just an hour every Thursday afternoon. Seniors and online safety. The first day, 6 people showed up, 3 widows, 1 retired mechanic, 2 couples who still wrote passwords on paper tucked into drawers. I didn't scare them. I didn't lecture. I told them a story. About a phishing email that almost fooled someone who was paying attention. About router logs and 2-factor authentication. About pride. About not assuming you're too old to learn. One woman raised her hand at the end. "Did you report him?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Was that hard?" "Yes." "Would you do it again?" Without hesitation, I answered. "Yes." Because protecting yourself is not betrayal, it's responsibility. Rosalie's divorce finalized 6 months after the sentencing. No dramatic courtroom scene, just signatures, division of remaining assets. Restitution structured so that her personal funds were legally separated from his obligations. When she came home with the paperwork, she placed it on the kitchen table. "It feels official," she said. "It is." She sat down slowly. "I don't feel angry anymore. What do you feel?" She thought for a long moment. "Clear." That word settled warmly in my chest. Clear is better than angry. Clear means you see. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun lower itself behind the trees, Rosalie asked something I hadn't expected. "Mom, when he first said you wouldn't understand technology, what did you feel?" I smiled softly. Still, yes, because dismissal tells you more about someone than praise ever could." She leaned back in her chair. "I wish I had seen it sooner." "You saw it when you were ready." She looked at me carefully. "Were you ever afraid of him?" "Yes." I considered that honestly. "No," I said, "I was afraid for you." Her eyes softened. "And now I trust you." That seemed to mean something to her. Months later, I received a letter, handwritten, from Sullivan. I opened it at my desk. He did not apologize dramatically. He did not justify. He wrote simply that he had convinced himself he was smarter than the system. That he would win before anyone noticed. That when I didn't fall for it, he felt challenged instead of ashamed. He admitted he underestimated me. He admitted that arrogance had always been his weakness. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not as a trophy, not as closure, just as a reminder. Even intelligent men can mistake wisdom for ignorance. And sometimes it costs them everything. Rosalie eventually moved into a brighter apartment. More windows, more plants. She laughed more easily again, not the same as before, stronger. One afternoon, as we arranged books on her new shelf, she held up a small framed photo from her wedding day. She looked at it quietly. "Do you want to keep it?" I asked. She studied the image, the white dress, the confident groom, the hopeful bride. "Yes," she said finally, "but not for the reasons I thought." Why then, to remember that I survived my own misjudgment. I nodded. That is growth, not pretending it didn't happen, but refusing to let it define you. Looking back, the technology was never the real story. It was ego, control, assumption. Sullivan believed intelligence meant superiority. He believed complexity created advantage. He believed I wouldn't look closely. That was his first mistake, but it wasn't his worst. His worst mistake was believing that trust could be bent without breaking.